Under the guise of civility, they plotted your collapse. Day after day, week after week, they stitched lies into strategy. They convened behind glass walls and digital veils, dressed in the skin of diplomacy while muttering poison. Your name sat like prey on their tongues, something to be dissected, studied, destroyed. They were methodical, relentless. Every fake smile was a blade. Every passive comment, a puzzle piece in a larger trap. They believed time would guarantee their success, that a year of strategy, of surveillance, of subtle sabotage would eventually corrode you from within. What they forgot, what they could never calculate, was that all their scheming lacked the most crucial variable, your unpredictability. And that is where they sealed their fate. You see, when people invest that much effort into your downfall, they are subconsciously preparing to bow before you. That kind of obsession is never about justice. It's about control. They didn't want to watch you fail. They needed to make you fail, because your very existence highlighted their irrelevance. Your breath threatened their narrative. So they became architects of your demise, laying blueprints with whispered betrayal and foundation stones made of envy. They plotted in darkness, and darkness does something peculiar to cowards. It makes them believe they are gods. Until you turn on the light. That light, it came not as thunder, not as spectacle. It came in 6 seconds of quiet devastation. Maybe it was a sentence, a look, a decision, or even your refusal to engage. Whatever it was, it sliced through their illusions with surgical cruelty. All that plotting, undone in a blink. 12 months of coordinated venom, reduced to debris beneath your heel. They weren't ready. They couldn't be, because their world was built on assumption. Assumption that you'd stay where they left you, that you'd shrink, obey, collapse, and when you didn't, their entire mental infrastructure caved in. You didn't just return. You returned upgraded. Psychologically, it's surgical. The brain anticipates outcomes it has rehearsed. They rehearsed your ruin 1,000 times. Each meeting, each fake gesture, each fake laugh. They convinced themselves of your fragility. That illusion became muscle memory. And when the real you returned, standing taller, sharper, more silent than they remembered, their nervous system collapsed under the weight of cognitive dissonance. That's the thing about schemers. They prepare for war, but not for your clarity. You didn't just defeat them, you made them irrelevant in the narrative they wrote. Their collapse wasn't theatrical. It was psychological rot. You saw it in the way their eyes darted when you spoke, in the microtremors of their voice when they addressed you, in their sudden forgetfulness, their missteps, their dwindling presence in the spaces they once dominated. They had weaponized time, and you turned it into an autopsy. You forced them to look at 12 months of effort and realize it had amounted to nothing, and that's what broke them. Not just failure, meaningless failure. There is no worse realization for a strategist than discovering their entire blueprint disintegrated against a glance. Your power was not in force. It was in timing. You waited, you endured, you let them write the script, you watched them build their stage. And then, when the spotlight turned, you stepped in, not as the expected character, but as the director. You rewrote the entire scene in 6 seconds. They didn't understand how you could still be standing. They thought they had removed every support. They thought your foundation had crumbled, but you had rebuilt. Not for revenge, for redefinition. You didn't want to burn their stage. You simply rendered it too small for your presence. Let's talk about what broke them. It wasn't your strength. It was your precision. You didn't retaliate. You didn't lower yourself. You rose in silence, and they couldn't follow. You weren't fighting anymore. You were ascending, and they were exposed, not as masterminds, but as petty conspirators who thought war was won through whispers. They now had to live with the fact that you outgrew the battlefield, and nothing is more humiliating to a schemer than being outclassed by someone who never even played their game. Now they sit in rooms they once ruled and pretend they're still kings, but their hands tremble. Their voice shakes. Because your presence lingers, you've become the anomaly in their logic, the glitch in their prophecy. Every plan they made, every move they executed, it all amounts to a ghost story they whisper when you're gone. What if they come back again? That's your legacy now. You're not the threat they prepare for. You're the standard they can't meet. You've become myth, and myths don't need to explain themselves. And what have you now? You've seen what people do when they think you're powerless. You've tasted the sharpness of betrayal. But you didn't rot. You didn't respond with venom. You responded with transformation. And now your transformation is the punishment. Your composure is the consequence. You broke them, not with fury, but with silence so refined, it sliced through their narrative like glass. You're not loud. You're legendary. That's the weapon they never accounted for, your ability to outgrow their reach. 6 seconds. That's all it took. Not to destroy, but to reveal their inadequacy, their cowardice, their illusion of control. And now, the rooms they enter are stained with your absence. Your name carries weight they can't match. Your silence casts shadows they can't outrun. 12 months of scheming, gone in less than a breath. That's not revenge. That's poetry written in power. And they're the footnote, a memory, a warning, proof that time isn't what wins, precision does. They panicked at their own speculation. You watched them pace in endless circles, the same loop of assumptions brewing in dark corners of their minds. They replayed every moment you stood firm, every silence that squeezed their narratives, until their reflections looked like threats. It was as if their imaginations sprouted limbs, turning into echoing monsters that haunted every room. Their fear wasn't rooted in reality. It was rooted in possibility. You had given them nothing to attack, and that scared them more. Because when there's no substance to blame, paranoia fills the space instead. And paranoia is a predator that seldom misses its prey. They sowed seeds of doubt among allies. Did you notice how they didn't respond? They skipped our meetings. Maybe they're plotting. Those whispers echoed in empty hallways until every glance toward you carried suspicion. They began drafting contingency plans for actions you never took, building walls around threats that only lived in their minds. Their paranoia transformed them into caricatures of themselves. Minds, once sharp now, cluttered with hypothetical catastrophes. Every rumor about you became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because in their minds, they had done the plotting, and that projection became their prison. People think pressure fractures fortitude, but what breaks stronger is uncertainty. And these schemers collapsed under the seismic weight of the unknown. You didn't do anything. No revelations, no spectacles, no retribution. You left them alone with their thoughts, and their thoughts turned on them. They debated fictional alliances, wrote internal memos about your possible intentions, sent passive-aggressive messages that grew more unhinged with each draft. They convinced themselves you were elusive because you must be dangerous, and fear of a made-up threat is often worse than fear of a real one, because it cannot be negotiated with. It can only be felt. They panicked in reflections, their own faces in screens, in windows, in polished furniture, faces flickering with guilt or confusion, because at some point, they realized that they had constructed a world to imprison you, a world built on paranoid constructs. That realization haunted them. They became consumed by the architecture of their own making. That's what your power revealed. Not your presence, but their pattern. And watching them struggle under the weight of their own suspicion was the quietest form of domination. At one point, they started editing each other's speeches to avoid accidentally mentioning your name. They danced around your existence like a taboo. Every direct mention became a risk. What if you were listening? What if you were already taking action? The imagined stakes became higher than reality, and in that spiral, they built a cage around their own mouths. Without noticing, your silence had become the cage's shadow. It taught them that sometimes the greatest weapon is the absence of action, a blank page they cannot fill without revealing their true intentions. Their panic leaked into the professional sphere. It became visible in charts that suddenly dropped your growth indicators, presentations that excluded your contributions, strategic meetings where your future was debated as a liability. Every element of their paranoia demanded logistics. You didn't call them out. You let them call themselves out. Each decision became weaker. Each plan more convoluted. They couldn't remember what they were protecting their hard work from, but they knew it had your face. And so they made lists, meetings, red flags, guardrails, all to contain a threat that existed only in their own minds. One of them confessed their dread to a colleague. "I don't sleep. I keep thinking they're about to level everything." That confession did more damage than any legal document, because it meant they had lost morale, conviction, momentum. They planted a seed of fear so deep they forgot what they were afraid of. And that allowed you to rise not through action, but through calm. Every breath you took was a whisper of triumph. Every step you made toward your goal without interference, a victory. You didn't need to launch an attack. Their mental collapse paved the way. You watched as they tried to recover by pivoting to overcompensation, announcing new projects, new alliances, new narratives. But the overreaction only highlighted their insecurity. The boardroom chatter shifted. They looked desperate. Their energy had no focus, no strategy, just a heartbeat of panic, echoing through everything they now did. They were erasing themselves in service of disappearing you, and that made their disappearance passive, invisible, controlled by the phantoms they birthed. You, meanwhile, were moving through rooms untouched by their tremors. You became the stillness in their storm. That's when people began to whisper about you differently, about how someone who remained silent, unseen, untouched could remain unshakable, not because they were invulnerable, but because they were unassailable. You didn't break them with aggression. You broke them with absence of emotion. They panicked at their own speculation, and now no one trusts their judgment, because they now look crazy, and a crazy person worried about your existence. That paranoia dethroned them more effectively than any proof of competence would have crowned you.